So yeah, this is a work in progress. So yeah, I'm curious to see what y'all think. So yeah, just a little bit of outline. Yeah, I have to. So there's been this recent trend within animal training. Some of you may have heard of it if you're into especially dog training, but it's gaining popularity within horse training as well. So this is a type of training that is referred to as cooperative, voluntary, or collaborative training protocols. And what unifies these types of protocols is that they use something called stop and start button behaviors. So these are non-verbal cues used by the animal to communicate that they want to opt in or out of an interaction or a procedure. So they can, for example, consist of an animal performing a simple target behavior, for example, touching something with their nose or their muzzle. Or it could also be resting their chin or a limb on a particular predetermined surface, like a mat. So the start button behavior signals that the animal is willing to start or continue with a particular procedure. But the breaking off of the behavior signals that they want to opt out or pause. As we will see, there are also those that use particular stop button behaviors. So it could be like maybe moving their chin from one surface to another, for example. So a stop button or a stop button behavior does not have to be just breaking off of the start button behavior. And these training methods developed from the more general positive reinforcement approach within animal training. So here are some papers. Those on the left are more generally focused on reinforcement-based training, and those on the right are actually the only two papers in peer-reviewed papers in journals that I've found that focus on cooperative or collaborative training protocols. So there's not much written about this. So what I find interesting here is that these protocols originally were developed about 10 years ago, and for very pragmatic and practical reasons. So for example, people working in zoos handle a lot of big animals, and if a big animal doesn't want to do something, it might get dangerous, not only for the animal, but for the human handler as well. They also, in the case of smaller animals like dogs, cats, and horses, have been shown to be quite effective and efficient ways to desensitize animals to things they find scary or threatening. So there's been all of these like pragmatic and practical reasons, but I think there are also very interesting philosophical implications here. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So only two peer-reviewed papers, but there is some like literature and some seminars online on this. But also here, quite scarce. There's a famous animal trainer called Eva Bertilsson. I don't know if you've heard about her. She's in the process of writing or finishing a book, I should say, about start and stop button behaviors. And I think it would be the first one where that aspect of collaborative or cooperative training protocols is written about in a book. So I'm gonna say something more so you get an idea of how these protocols look like. So start and stop button behaviors, they are named variously in the literature. Some people call them cooperative or collaborative, conversational, voluntary, participatory, choice-based approaches to animal training and husbandry. And the core idea is that the interaction is organized around signals or actions that communicate that the animal is willing or is not willing to proceed or start with a type of interaction or procedure. There are also examples of authors using terminology like consent behaviors to refer to these behaviors. So for example, to signal start or continue, the animal could, for example, perform a one-off behavior like tapping a particular object with their body part and signal stop by not tapping the particular object or by tapping a designated stop object. But start and stop signals can also be continuous behaviors, like laying down on a mat, for example. And so continuous start behavior could be a dog lying on a mat. And as long as the dog is lying there, that would communicate that they're willing to continue with the interaction. Yeah, just some illustrations of what I just said. So the general structure of an interaction organized around start and stop buttons can be described as first involving an initiation. So the human invites the animal to engage with them in a particular procedure or interaction. But animals that are already initiated in these behaviors, they can also request that such an interaction starts. And the animal always chooses if and when the procedure takes place by accepting or declining this invitation. And during the whole interaction, the animal continues to be in control of the interaction, the pace and whether it continues. And the animal can, opt out at any time. So for an animal and a human to interact interacts with a human using these behaviors, they first have to learn them. So you have to establish start and stop button behaviors. And you can, for example, do that by teaching an animal a particular non-default behavior. For example, as I mentioned before, touching an object with their muzzle or their nose. And after a while, when they are able to do that, that behavior should be paired with something that is potentially aversive or is aversive. And I should say that when I say aversive, I just mean that we'll come back to that later because it's an important point here. It's not that you pair the start or stop, or the start button behavior, I should say, with something that is that the animal finds like painful or very threatening or anything like that. But for example, if we'll see that. If an animal, for example, finds it difficult or has never had eye drops, for example, you need to start with some small step and increase in small increments until you reach the final or the goal of actually being able to give the animal eye drops. So the first step could be, for example, having your hand close to their face. So that's what I'm referring to here when I say potentially or de facto aversive behavior. And the animal quickly learns that when they are presented with the target, they are able, or they will be able to control the behavior of the human by performing start and stop button behaviors. So we'll look at a video of a giraffe that was called Melvin. He passed away a few years ago. He lived in Kristiansand Zoo in the south of Norway. So here in the following video, trainer Eva Bertilsson here is trying to establish or initiate Melvin in using a start button behavior. And the start button behavior is then paired with tactile stimuli. So she will just begin with having her hand close to his face and then continue to like touch his face. And as we will see, the target used to ask him or invite him to the interaction is particular for tactile stimuli. So that particular target here means specifically for Melvin, or they are trying to establish this meaning, that this means that he will opt in or out of an interaction where he will be touched in some way. So yeah, he's been initiated in using this start button behavior by performing a target behavior, getting treats, and then Eva Bertilsson will touch his head. So I'll see if we can get this video started. Yeah. Being a giraffe, he will use his tongue. That's the most convenient. So he's just learning this contingency between the target behavior and the head touching. We can continue to another example, a horse that is being taught a stop behavior. So this yellow thing here is the target for stop. We have reinforcement there on the ground in the form of hay, and the person standing in the blue shirt is gonna lift his right leg up. So they are trying to teach him that if he wants that person or any person to let go of his leg, he just needs to touch the yellow object. Yeah. So this is also very early in the process. So they're just trying to make him understand the contingency. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So an interesting thing about start button behaviors is that practitioners, for example, Eva Bertilsson and others, they tell me when I ask them about, are they transferable? Like, do the animal understand this contingency in a general way? Can they generalize it? And their answer is usually yes. There is no need than for practical reasons to have different start and stop buttons. It seems to be sufficient that there are just contextual cues. Like, for example, if you, instead of like clipping a dog's claws, you want to give them eye drops, it seems sufficient that the dog has some learning history, understanding what that particular object, like for example, the eye drops represent, for them to understand that. And so if you use a general invitatory signal, for example, a particular mat that they can rest their chin on, they seem to understand that they can, that the same kind of contingency will hold also in this new interaction. And I think there might be interesting implications here. So the invitation could be seen as a question. So do you want to be subjected to this particular thing for something, any type of reinforcer? But it also seems to be the case that when the animal understands this contingency, the invitatory behavior also seems to be some kind of assurance or signaling some kind of commitment on part of the human. So there might be something here that makes it relevant for questions about consent or assent. Of course, as I said, there are very practical and pragmatic reasons why people started using these methods, and there have recently been some papers reporting welfare benefits of using these methods. But I don't want to talk about those benefits. I'm interested in questions about control and agency, and maybe consent or assent. So control is something that's very important for all animals. It seems to be non-instrumentally important as well. So like just experiencing that you are in control is reinforcing in and by itself. There was an interesting, very short, like a paragraph, I think, in one of two peer-reviewed papers I found on stop and start button behaviors training. So they predicted an increase in compliance in the dogs. So this was a study where one group of dogs were trained using start and stop button behaviors, and the other, didn't receive any training at all. And then they wanted to see if there was any change. And so the aversive stimuli was being at the vets. And one of the predictions was that the group that was trained using start and stop button behaviors would be more compliant at the vets. And I mean, the question boils down to how do we define compliance here? I mean, they did communicate with the people, but the outcome was that the dogs trained using these methods actually, at least according to the authors, were less compliant. And the authors seem to find this confusing, and you can read the paper yourself, but I think it's not very surprising. So if given an actual choice, I think an agent will exercise that choice. And I mean, given that a lot of the things that we want to do with animals are aversive to them, I think it's not strange that they would probably choose to do otherwise if given the opportunity. Okay, so I just have less than a minute left. So some possible implications here. So start buttons seem to provide a way of initiating humans and non-human animals in a form of formalized interspecies language that enables humans to ask animals for permission and for animals to express their wants and preferences. But the use of these methods, when both parties are initiated in the protocol, seems to also provide some kind of assurance to the animal that the human will commit to a particular local norm. The animals seem to understand that the particular interaction is governed by a particular contingency, and that they are in control of that interaction. I'm just looking at you to see how many seconds I have left. So I would like to ask you in the audience what you think about what you've heard in relation to things like trust, promise, and consent. I know that Healy and Pepper, you write in your paper that because animals cannot understand, form, and communicate complex intentions about normative concepts like rights and duties, they cannot give consent. But I would like to challenge you a bit on that. to me, it seems like animals that are initiated in these behaviors, they at least seem to, it doesn't seem far-fetched to say that they seem to understand that their will governs this particular interaction in a way. The animals also seem to know that these types of interactions are very different from other interactions. So trainers and others use something called force cues. So that's a cue to differentiate like a voluntary or cooperative interaction from one where you will not let the animal control the interaction. And animals will behave very differently. So in general, I would say that animals that, when you present the force cue to them, like whatever follows now, you have no control or choice in the matter. Animals will not be non-compliant, quite the opposite. They will be quite compliant. And animals that, yeah, you saw the example with the dogs in the study. So those are interesting things here. They seem to understand the difference. And yeah, I'm already past my time, right?
I mean, you're within the Q&A, but if you...
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to like point at some possible human analogs here, like exposure therapy, you know, consent in various medical contexts, but also safe words used in some sexual practices. Yeah, I'll just stop there.